أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everybody to a very special presentation by our beloved Abdul-Rehman. He's going to actually take us through some notes. I guess that's the best way to say it, some notes or some perspectives on the Conference of the Bird, which is something that I actually am particularly interested in hearing about, because that's a work that I've always wanted to learn more about and I've never gotten the chance. So before I just hand over control to Sidi Abdul-Rehman, I'm just going to read briefly his bio. So Abdul-Rehman Malik is an award-winning journalist, educator, and cultural organizer. Since June of 2019, he has been lecturer and associate research scholar at the Yale Divinity School. Abdul-Rehman also serves as program coordinator at Yale University's Council on Middle East Studies, leading on its cultural literacy programs, and as director of the Muslim Leadership Lab, an innovative student leadership program being incubated at the Dwight Hall Center of Social Justice at Yale. He remains programs manager for the UK-based Radical Middle Way, which offers powerful faith-inspired guidance and tools to enable change, combat exclusion and violence, and promote social justice for all. His work has spanned the UK, United States, Indonesia, Pakistan, Sudan, Mali, Morocco, Singapore, Canada, and Malaysia. Abdul-Rehman is a frequent journalist for BBC Radio. His most recent program was an essay for Radio 3's Holy Week 2019 entitled Behold the Man. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sidi Abdul-Rehman, and he is gonna take us through this exciting journey.
Jazakallah khair, Sidi Yusuf. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, friends, and may the greetings and blessings of the divine, our creator, the merciful, be upon each and every one of you and your families and your loved ones this evening and always. I just want to start off by saying what an honor it is for me to be part of the Muslim Center of Greater Princeton's Ramadan programming. This is a community that is beloved to so many of us and is certainly beloved to me for many, many reasons. One of them being Imam Mendez, who has been a friend, a comrade, a teacher for 25 years. And so it's an honor to be associated with the masjid at which he's the imam. I also want to give special thanks to Sajid Saeed Bhai and his family and the incredible volunteers who have put together this incredible programming during the month of Ramadan and beyond. When Sajid Bhai asked me a few weeks back whether I would I'd be interested in being part of this program, I was excited, I was honored, and right away my heart kind of came to this point where I was like, I think we should be talking about this very important book, this very important text, and this incredibly important story. And so I just want to say thank you again, Sajid Bhai, for allowing me this opportunity to talk a little bit about a book and a text which I have to say has been an incredibly important part of my life, that has been an incredibly important part of my own sort of spiritual journey, for lack of a better word. I'm gonna share my screen with you, and hopefully it will show up. And then I have a few slides, more to sort of help focus the conversation. So my hope with this is as follows: that for the next 35 or 40 minutes or so, we'll do the first part of which will be like a 3-part exploration of the Conference of the Birds, and particularly an exploration of one critical key story which happens in the first third of the book, and which in many ways sets up sets up the rest of the book for us, and we'll talk about that. But today, what I'd like to do in those 35-40 minutes that we have, and then we'll open it up for conversation, discussion. I always sort of shy away from saying questions and answers because I really want to hear your reactions, your feelings, your contentions, your questions, your comments, and your concerns. So let's call it a discussion rather than a than a Q&A. That will leave some time at the end to kind of explore your reactions to the text. I want to start off by talking about Untitled Chapter, which is often translated as the Conference of the Birds, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I want to start off with my personal introduction to this particular text. It was 1995. It was the fall term at the University of Toronto, and I was a third-year Islamic Studies major and a political science major. And I found myself in a class called Readings in Islamic Mystical Thought. At the time, I think I was struggling. I was struggling with what spirituality meant in my own tradition. I was struggling with finding an expression of Islam that not only made sense in my own life, but also in the contemporary political, social context that was around me, and being politically and socially engaged, and that time being the president of the Muslim Students Association at the University of Toronto. The very present questions on my mind, I would say, were not in many ways spiritual. They were much more practical. And so I approached this class that I found myself in, and it's a class actually I didn't want to take, but I found myself in it because of all kinds of scheduling issues, and I remember being at that point in my life where I was like, well, what does spirituality mean, and what does it mean when we talk about the spiritual path or the mystical path? Does this have is this part of what I have learned the Islamic tradition to be? And I have to say that what happened over the course of that year, because it was a year-long seminar, was I think a remarkable period in my life of deep questioning about who I was and the kind of Muslim I was, but also a deep questioning as to what my relationship with the divine and the creator was, but also how was I going to navigate life in a way that would bring me closer to God. And of course, those are questions that are never fully answered. When they're answered, more questions occur, and this is a lifelong process for you and I, for all of us, in terms of our own spiritual development. But among the texts we looked at that year, and we looked at many great texts, it was Fariduddin Attar's masterpiece, Untitled Chapter, which in some ways has stayed with me in a visceral heart way. There were other texts that we studied, including the works of Imam Ghazali, which have been instructive to me. They've been books that I've leaned on at various points in my life for guidance. But I come back to this particular book and this particular text because every time I read it, it does something inside of me. I have a really kind of somatic response to it, which in equal parts is joy, a bit of nostalgia, memories seem to be unlocked, and I feel a tenderness in myself that results from engaging in this incredible story. And I hope that we can engage some of that together over these 3 Sundays in this most blessed month of Ramadan. I also think that it's a book that is almost perfectly designed as a book to read in this particular month. And as we begin these first steps into the month of Ramadan, particularly in this moment that we're living in of quarantine and lockdown and pandemic, where there's so much anxiety around us, where the news of friends and loved ones who, some of whom have passed away, others who are facing disease and difficulty, and who are facing illness, and death, and is very present right now, and we're thinking about it together, as a community, in our families, in our own lives. We're thinking about these things. I almost believe that, and I'd like to say that something like Attar's Conference of the Birds is almost a perfect companion for us now. So as we engage in the reading of the Holy Book, and as we engage in reconnecting ourselves to the way of the beloved Al-Habib, upon whom be peace, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as we explore and mine this incredible wisdom tradition that is Islam, that is accessible to those who are of the Muslim faith and those who are of other faiths, and those who may at this point in their life have no faith, I have a firm belief, and I think we together should have a firm belief that our wisdom tradition, that this wisdom tradition is something that gives life, something that gives guidance, something which gives manna for the heart and soul in this particular time, and at all times. And so I think, and I hope that as we look at this particular text, that you too will find that that this is a book for our times, and that this is a book that will help you and those you love in some ways contend with what is happening around us today, and the challenges that we face. So what is it about this book? Well, let's go and let's look at some background around it. Fariduddin Attar was from a city called Nishapur in modern day Iran. Nishapur is very close to a city called Tus, and Tus, as many of you will know, is the city from where Imam al-Ghazali hailed. That is also the region where the poet al-Firdausi hailed from. It was a region full of scholarship. There is the city of Mashhad, where lies Imam Raza. This is a region and part of the Islamic civilization that was pregnant with scholarship, with architecture, with civilization, and with culture. And it is into this area eventually that the Mongol invasion comes and lays waste to much of that incredible architecture, much of that incredible physical beauty that was contained in these parts, in these geographies. We know that Attar was probably born around 1120 of the Christian era. Some people say as late as 1157, but 1120 seems to be the date that most authors and commentators give. Some of you will recall, in order to place Attar within sort of the timeline of Islamic history, that Imam al-Ghazali died in 1111. So Attar is born in 1120 and dies between 1220, and 1229. Some people say that he died as a result of the Mongol invasion, that in fact, when the Mongols heard about this saintly man who wrote poetry and who was a spiritual guide and a spiritual presence and a spiritual force, that in fact he was targeted, and that he was murdered. And of course, a great deal of lore and story, fantastical story, arises around Attar's life, but particularly around Attar's death. But I think it's important to understand where Fariduddin Attar is as he is beginning his own spiritual journeys. He's in a part of the world and a part of for us, the Islamic past, which is rich in poetry and scholarship and in culture. There's one really fascinating story about Attar's early life that I think is worth mentioning. And that is that some histories say that Attar met Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, the great Mevlana Rumi, the great poet and scholar and teacher, who is oft quoted and is now one of the best-selling poets in the United States in translation. It is said that Rumi, as a young child, him and his family came through the region of Nishapur, fleeing the Mongols from what is now known as Afghanistan. And it is said that because Mevlana Rumi's father was a scholar himself and an incredibly saintly and pious man, he came from a pious family, that Rumi's father and mother brought Mevlana to the presence of Fariduddin Attar, because Attar was known as a man of great spirituality and insight. And in some narrations, we are told that Rumi bounced on the knee of Fariduddin Attar, and that something happened in that encounter. There was something, for lack of a better word, alchemical that happened in that encounter between them. This great saintly figure and poet and writer, Attar, meeting Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, or who would become Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, among the greatest personalities of the Islamic past. Later on in his life, Rumi said, and I quote, "Attar traveled through all the 7 cities of love, while I am only at the bend of the first alley." In other places, Rumi called Attar his master and said that he was a ruh, that he was the spirit, and that Rumi was but Attar's shadow. It is also not unusual, because so much of the spiritual poetry and the poetry of the time was written in the Masnawi form, that this book, The Conference of the Birds, Untitled Chapter, is written in the Masnawi form, which are, each line has 10 or 11 syllables, and the lines are written in rhyming couplets. And this book, The Conference of the Birds, is 4,724. 4,724 couplets comprise the Conference of the Birds. Attar wrote a number of different works. He wrote books on the histories and stories and tales of the Friends of God, Tazkirat al-Awliya. He wrote books of spiritual practice and guidance. There's a lot of interesting secondary information about who Attar's teachers were, and it seems that he drew from the great ocean of spiritual and scholarly traditions that were present in the region in which he lived, in Nishapur. Before jumping into the book, I want to say that I had the opportunity in 1999, when I was visiting Iran with my very dear and beloved friend, journalist, writer, and broadcaster Afan Chaudhry. We visited Iran together, and in fact, we visited the resting place of Fariduddin Attar in Nishapur. And, you know, it's a memory that takes me back a while. But my memory of Attar's maqam and final resting place is really vivid. It's a beautiful maqam. It's a beautiful tomb, actually. And when we went, there was nobody else there. There's a lot of green around it. I remember forest and greenery and flowers and beautiful beautiful topiary just surrounding the grave itself. And the grave is not large, and the maqam structure isn't large, but it's really beautiful and is ornate. And the words, the poetry of Attar is written around the structure itself. And we went there and we said Surah Yasin and we prayed. And I'd like to think I had a copy of Conference of the Birds with me, but maybe that's a fiction. I'm not sure. I'm hoping that it was there and we took it. And I'm hoping that if I was on the ball, so to speak, I would have read some of that book, just in honor of Fariduddin Attar. But Attar's resting place is really magical. And we went right before the Maghrib prayer, and there was that wonderful golden hour that we all know of that comes and visits us on sunny days, and it was a place that was totally illumined by that beautiful golden hour. Talking about ornament, Attar himself thought of his work, thought of the Conference of the Birds, Mantiqut, highly. For him, it was an important work for him, maybe his most important work. He said that this book is an ornament for the ages. It offers something for both the high and low. If you came sad and frozen to this book, I love that imagery. If you came sad and frozen to this book, its hidden fire will blaze and melt your ice. Yes, these verses are magic. They grow more potent in each reading. They are like beauty under a veil that reveals its loveliness slowly. I feel like in my own experience, Attar's estimation of what this book means is most certainly true. The book is indeed an ornament. It's something that scholars, of which I'm not one, and saintly people and people of spiritual insight, they can comment on and find depth and vision truly connected to the great tradition of spirituality that flows from the beloved Al-Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And yet for the rest of us, for me certainly, it offers something accessible. It's a story which makes sense. And in some ways, it makes more sense with each reading of it. And then sometimes it stops making sense. And you realize that the book forces you to come to the limits of your spiritual and sometimes religious understanding. It's a book that sometimes, and I feel like I can testify to this, that when I approached this book, I think in some ways I was sad and anxious about my own faith. And I do believe that in some ways my heart was frozen. It was having difficulty coming to terms with the idea of what the spiritual life truly meant. And this truly was one of those texts which brought that back to life and gave me an awareness of the things that I didn't know, and that I felt that would probably take a lifetime to get to know. And I think when Attar says that these verses are magic, what he's really saying to us is that these verses are weave a spell that is not from magic that is dark, but that the words themselves weave a kind of spell around us. They take us in. They fascinate us. They are compelling to us. And that indeed they grow more potent with each reading. What is the book then? What is the story? Let's jump into the story. And let's jump in the story with three caveats. And not really three caveats, but I just think three notes that we should probably make to ourselves. I think note number one is that the story is in the vein of these fantastical mythic narratives. and therefore functions as a gripping reed, but also, more importantly, functions at the level of allegory and metaphor. There's something that Attar is using, the characters and the stories and the tales and these fascinating asides, which we'll talk about in a moment. He's using all of this to weave together an allegory of the spiritual path. That this is a book which, at various points in our life and our spiritual journey, is going to inform, question, push, prod, accept, challenge us as we journey this path towards the creator of the heavens and the earth, the merciful and compassionate God. The second note I'll say is that there's so much of Attar, like the literature of the past, that sometimes irks our modern sensibilities. Attar, like all other writers, is a product of his time. He's a product of his age. We look back on the writings of our collective past, and of course we take from it what we can, because there's something about the greatest of those writings that is not only evergreen but ever relevant. But there is to our modern sensibility certain things about the text that will irk us, representations of masculinity and femininity, for instance. And I think that's important to keep in mind as well, as we approach the text. And then the third thing that I'll say is that there's ways that Attar deals with notions of the other, the notions of those who are not on this particular spiritual path. And I think it's really important to read Attar very, very carefully. There's certain translations of this book which will, I think, use shorthand to explain some of what Attar is talking about. This is a difficult book by all accounts, and certainly by the accounts of the translators, because I too am reading it in translation. That the accounts of the translators of this book is that this is a very hard book to translate. There's so much there, and as one translator said, to translate a book like this is to heave a scalpel. That you are always going to be cutting meaning away in order for it to make sense in another language to us as English speaking and English reading readers. And so I think that in some translations, a lot of shorthand is taken, and we don't get a sense of some of the complexity of Attar's language. So sometimes in some translations you'll find references to other faith traditions that seem almost dismissive. Part of that is the time. Part of that is the shorthand of the translator. But as one of the contemporary translators of Mantecoter, of Conference of the Birds, has talked about, that it's always important to read Attar within the broader spiritual project of what the book is. And this will become more apparent when we get into that I think iconic and pivotal story that I want to share with you. What's Mantecoter, the Conference of the Birds, all about? And Mantek is an incredible word, isn't it? We know it to be rhetoric, sometimes translated as speech. Sometimes it's translated as grammar. But the most translators feel that the sensibility of Mantik and its use here, particularly within this Persian text, is that it is a conference. And literally, that's what it is. It's a conference of the birds. And so here's the general story. All the birds have come together. All the incredible birds, the peacocks and the parrots, nightingales and sparrows, cardinals and jays, eagles, they've all come together. And they are in a state of distress, and they are in a state of deep, deep concern. They are worried, and what are they worried about? That to me is what's fascinating about this book. They're concerned that they themselves do not have a leader, that they are leaderless, that they amongst themselves have little unity, that each bird is pursuing their own course on earth and their own course in life, but they all know that death is inevitable, and that they all know that they are creations of God, and they are looking for some kind of spiritual leadership. They want someone to unite their hearts, and they want someone to unite them in purpose. And so the book begins with the birds talking to each other. And the birds are talking to each other, and they're engaging with one another. And into this scene comes the hoopoe. The hoopoe, as we know from Islamic lore, is the bird who is the companion of Suleiman, the prophet, upon whom be peace, King Solomon in the Christian and of course the Jewish tradition, the tradition of the Hebrew Bible. Into this conference of the birds, as they are trying to figure out their very purpose in life, as they're trying to find leadership, as they are trying to find direction, enters the hoopoe. And the hoopoe, within Islamic spiritual literature and poetry, occupies this important place. The hoopoe is the most intelligent of the birds, is among the most sublime and beautiful of the birds, is certainly among the most mythic of the birds. It is the bird that knows the languages of all the other birds. It's the bird who knows the languages of the other animals. He is the bird, and in some cases she is the bird, because the hoopoe is referred to in the feminine and in the masculine, that the hoopoe is the bird which takes the most important messages for the prophet Solomon, Suleiman, to where those messages need to go. And so the book begins with this explanation and this description, rather, of the hoopoe. Greetings, hoopoe messenger and guide, every valley's honest courier. King Solomon, who spoke the language of the birds, adorned your head with a crown of honor, made you his secret-bearing messenger to carry letters to the Queen of Sheba. Now, to remain King Solomon's intimate and accompany the king on his flying carpet, you must control your ego monster and fetter it with shackles and chains. Right at the beginning, Attar is telling us why the hoopoe is going to be the most important character in this story. Because the hoopoe, by virtue of the hoopoe's position in the court of the greatest of the kings, means that the hoopoe can go down two different paths. She can become one who is arrogant in her position as messenger and guide and courier to the greatest of the kings. Or the hoopoe can become wise, understand the language of the court, understand the language of imperial negotiation, understand, living with Solomon, the language of prophecy, the language of how to teach religion, the language of how to encapsulate complicated, complex ideas of the complex world in a way that others can understand. The hoopoe is the messenger. But the hoopoe is also then having to be terribly observant, having to observe the way in which the prophet Solomon behaves. And it is said that Suleiman and Solomon was wise, and there's no doubt the hoopoe has extracted through observation and what would to us seem logical not just the observation, but the practice of Suleiman's spiritual path. And what's really interesting about this introduction to our guide, the Hupu, is that if you want to remain in the court of the king, if you want to take full advantage of that honored position and fly with the king on his flying carpet, and we know that our tradition has many stories about the fantastic and amazing things that happened in the court of Suleiman alayhi salam, King Solomon, upon whom be peace, that to truly benefit from the company of someone like that, you have to control your ego monster. You have to control what we have been told is called the nafs al-lawama bisu, that lower part of ourself which calls to all that is ugly. That the thing which calls to ugliness, ego and arrogance, pride and jealousy, ungraciousness, anger, the arrogation of the self, ultimately, that thing's got to be controlled. If we don't control that, then how can you fully benefit from being with the king? And so it is the sense that is given to us very quickly in Athar's narrative, is that the Hupu enters the scene of the gathering of the birds, who are in anxiety and confusion and are dealing with their own spiritual and real struggles, and who are trying to come to terms with the need for direction. They want some kind of greater guide. They find the Hupu now becomes the interlocutor. In some ways, the Hupu becomes like a sheikha, like a spiritual guide, to get them to their ultimate destination, to get them to the ultimate guide, to get them to the ultimate source of guidance. And so the Hupu, our sense is, has shackled her chains and has fettered them, but that has not made the Hupu any less intelligent. In fact, in controlling her ego and in controlling her pride, the Hupu has in fact unlocked wisdom and understanding and humor. I find it's so lovely that in the book, there's all these wonderful, wonderful moments where the Hupu is it's mischievous, funny, pokes fun at the other birds when they raise their complaints, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. And I'm keeping my eye on the time. And the ability to do this over 3 weeks is really once again a testament to the trust that Sajid Bhai and his team have placed with me, for which again I'm incredibly grateful and honored. That the Hupu is really, really humorous. And loses nothing of her mischievousness, loses nothing of her ability to basically tell a great story, to weave an important yarn. But underneath that is literally a bird who is truly engaged, who is truly engaged in the path of love, is in the path of love. And so what does the Hupu say to the birds? Well, the story begins and opens with a number of birds presenting their complaints. The Hupu says to them that, look, if you want to solve this problem of lack of unity and direction, then we need to go on a journey, says the Hupu. We need to go on a journey, and we need to go to the great Simurgh. Who is the Simurgh? The great Simurgh is the greatest of the birds, is the bird that is mythic, magical, beautiful, has incredible wisdom, can tell us the truth of things. That's who the Simurgh is. And so the Hupu says that if we truly want to unite in heart and in purpose, if we truly want to draw close to the divine, if we truly want to see our lives matter, really matter, and not be merely wasted in cages or in service to human beings or in the day-to-day banality of finding food and all those things which are necessary but are part of life and not the point of life. The Hupu says that we need to go on a journey. And we need to go on a journey to this astonishing thing, one of the translations says. This astonishing thing called the Simurgh. And it is said that the Simurgh emerged, that the knowledge of the Simurgh emerged in China. And of course, in Athar's time, this would have been truly evocative. And when people would have read or rather heard these couplets being said about the Simurgh's first astonishing manifestation in China, they of course would have brought to their lips and to their hearts the saying of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, that seek knowledge even if it takes you to China. So this is something already that if we're going to go to the Simurgh and engage with this astonishing being to unite us and to lead us to be truly the first amongst the birds, then we're going to have to travel a long way. And as the Hupu quickly tells the assembled birds, that it's going to be a tough journey. It's going to be a hard journey. And it's not going to be for the faint-hearted. And it's not going to be for those who are weak. It's not going to be for those who are going to stumble at the first hurdle. It's not going to be for those who are terrified of created things. This is a journey for the heartful. This is the journey for those who really want to see their aspiration come to pass. This is a journey for those who want to find truth. This is a journey for those who truly love God. And that's the challenge that the Hupu places before the birds. It says that if we're going to travel to the Simurgh, a lot's going to happen. And then there's a wonderful section of the story as we begin, where each of the birds comes forward and starts to talk about not only their experience of life, but actually tries to now put forward some excuses. Because the birds are very quickly realizing that what they have gotten together to discuss is much bigger than they imagined it to be. They thought that maybe unity would be easy, or certainly that unity and having a sense of purpose wouldn't be as hard as this. Wouldn't be as hard as what the Hupu is telling us. Wouldn't be as hard as risking life, limb, mind, and most of all heart. That's what's being asked. What the Hupu is saying is that if you want to get true knowledge, if you want to know the truth about yourselves and your place in creation, if you want to know your creator and you want to get to that being which is going to help you get there, then you are going to have to go through some difficult times. That you're going to have to go through moments of suffering. That you're going to have to go through moments that are going to turn your head and your heart. That you're going to have to go through moments of sadness and brokenheartedness. And don't we all know that? We all know that that's life. That's such an intrinsic part of this gift that God Almighty has given us. And we understand it even more, don't we, in the month of Ramadan, when the hunger starts to hit a little bit and and our nerves fray and we get agitated. And we sometimes feel like, are we going to make it through the day? And if we make it through the day, we think, oh, there's so many days left. But then there's so many other things that come to us. Ramadan doesn't stop life from visiting us. And we make a special prayer at this juncture for all of our brothers and sisters, fellows in humanity that have passed away during this particular pandemic. A special prayer for those in our community who have passed away. Some of us have seen and experienced the loss of our friends, the loss of our parents and loved ones. We have seen the loss of remarkable individuals, and every person God has made remarkable. And so we make dua for them, for their forgiveness, for their high station in Firdaus, for their graves and their resting places to be surrounded by light and to be surrounded by the perfume of paradise. And we especially make dua today, and we'd be remiss not to, for our beloved Imam Suhaib Sultan, who we know is going through a great test right now with his illness, and particularly in your community, in the community of around Princeton. I know how this has rocked so many of your hearts, and the incredible strength and generosity that Imam Suhaib and his wife Arshi and his family are showing, that the way they're dealing with this is such an example for all of us. And we make dua for his healing and for his recovery, and the recovery and healing for all those who are sick. I'm going to take 3 more minutes, and then we'll open it up, and inshallah then we'll continue next week, bi'ithnillah. And so each of the birds comes, and I have a question from someone around which translation of this book do you recommend. I will talk about that in a moment, but thank you for that question, because it's an important one, and there's 2 that I've been using in preparation for this, and I'll share the pros and cons, I think, of both of them with you in just a moment. So each of the birds comes and presents their excuse. So first, the nightingale comes, and the nightingale, of course, the sound of the nightingale is so beautiful, and the nightingale says, "Well, I sing the songs of love. I know all the secrets of love, and if this is an act of love that we're engaged in, to go to the Simurgh, to see this, to see and find the source of true love." To find the true beloved, which is, of course, that's the journey. The journey is to be united and to find someone who can unlock the keys to the source of all love, the creator of the heavens and the earth. Then the nightingale says, "Well, I already have that knowledge. And because I'm so delicate in my sensibilities, and because I've spent my whole life singing of love, that the journey to the Simurgh is beyond my strength. The love of the rose is enough for the nightingale," says the nightingale. "It is for me that she flowers with her 100 petals. That's more than I could ever wish. Why would I want more?" And so the nightingale slowly is taking a step back because the journey is going to be difficult. And then the hoopoe responds. The hoopoe replied, "Oh, nightingale, you who would stay behind dazzled forms, the dazzled exterior form of things, cease to delight in an attachment so deluding. Don't attach yourself to the mere form of love, to beautiful things. The love of the rose," the hoopoe tells us, "has many forms, and it has disturbed and dominated you. Although the rose is fair, the beauty of the rose is soon gone. One who seeks self-perfection should not become the slave of a love so passing. If the smile of the rose arouses your desire, it will only fill your days and night with lamentations. Forsake the rose and blush for yourself. for she laughs at you with each new spring, and then she smiles no more. The language is so beautiful. The hupu is like, you believe in the form of love? Love is bigger than that, more serious than that. Don't look to the form of love, look to the reality of love. Because the form of love will always let you down. But the source of love will never let you down. The source of love will always give. The source of love will always give. Connect yourself to that source of love. And so in turn, to conclude, the nightingale, and then the parrot, and then the peacock, and then the duck, and then the partridge, and the hume, and the hawk, and the heron, and the pheasant, and the owl, and the sparrow, all of them place before the hupu their regret, their complaint, their excuse to say that maybe I didn't think this journey through. Maybe this journey is too much for me. And each time the hupu responds, the hupu gives a lesson. And the lesson ultimately, my dear brothers and sisters, my dear friends, is don't look to the form of things. Don't look to the outside of things. Beautiful forms come and go, but the source of beauty always remains. People may be merciful and compassionate at times, and they may be mean and ugly at other times. Look at our own selves. I look at myself. But the source of mercy and compassion, that's everlasting. That's an ocean. That's the thing we want to get to. And so the hupu sets forth these 7 valleys of the journey, says it's going to be tough, and we're going to cross these 7 valleys. There's the valley of the quest, and the valley of love, and then the valley of understanding. And each of these has challenges, because when you start on a quest, there are challenges. When you engage with love, there are challenges. When you start to get some understanding of religion, for those of you who have studied, you know that there's challenges that come with that. Then there's the valley of independence and detachment, the valley of unity, when one experiences, yes, we are united, but that comes with challenges too. And then astonishment and bewilderment as one begins to see the reality of things, and it's overwhelming. And then, of course, the valley of deprivation and death, the thing we must all face, difficulty in life, and the difficulties of life. And so at this moment, the hupu makes a compelling argument that indeed the journey is worth taking, and they must now begin. They must now begin. And that's when the hupu will begin with this incredible, and we'll start there next week, begins with this incredible exhortation, almost like a khutbah, where the hupu, she stands herself up amongst all the birds and she delivers this sermon on love and the desire of love. And then she tells us a story. And it's the story which I know excited me and just brought me alive when I was reading this book for the first time and on subsequent times. The story of Sheikh Sanan and his great journey to Rum and his love for another human being, which nearly destroyed him. So that's my cliffhanger. May these days of Ramadan, we have about 5 or 6 minutes. I'm so sorry for going on too long. That we have in this month of Ramadan an opportunity to go on this journey together, and we're all on this journey together. And my hope is that over the next 3 weeks we'll be able to reflect on our own fasting experience and our own experience during this time and during this blessed sacred time, and I hope it'll be of some value and edifying and sort of illustrative to the journeys that we're on. I'm gonna open it up in these last moments that we have. Feel free to drop a message into the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that I can put everyone on gallery view. Are there any questions, comments, concerns?
Start video.
Can hear.
Sajid, I can hear you.
I can hear Faria Bhan. Assalamu alaikum, Faria. How are you?
Assalamu alaikum.
It's nice to virtually see so many friends. So does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, reflections? Please feel free to jump in. You can put up your hand, or just be recognized, or throw it in the chat.
Is the chat disabled?
Oh, the chat is disabled. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. It is. So yeah. Please verbally. Please feel free to jump in. Sajid bhai, is it?
Thank you,
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Excellent presentation. So, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
No, thank you for the excellent presentation. I think we were waiting for you to open the chat room so we can.
Oh, is it okay? So I have to do that. Hold on. Let me do that. Sorry, my apologies. I think it is open now.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, this is Yusuf. So I think I just clicked on a setting.
Okay.
Let me see if I can type something.
Yes, it is there. It's open. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Several people have said it's open. Wa alaikum salam, Iman.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How are you?
I'm Assalamu alaikum. I'm Zat Mania. I must give you credit. It was an incredible talk, very thought-provoking. And I'm the one who asked you what would be the best translation.
Good. Oh, no. Thank you for that. No, thank you for that, and thank you for the reminder. So I'll bring one of them up to the screen. So when I first read the book, I read this particular version. It's published by Shambhala Press in Boston. It's translated by C.S. Knott. It's called The Conference of the Birds, a Sufi fable by Fariddin Attar. It's an older translation. It's a 1954 translation that was republished. I have to say that I have a kind of an emotional attachment for this particular translation, only because it was the first time I read it, and it's such an important experience in my life, and I actually need, in not only in fairness but in honor to my first teacher who taught me this text, Professor Timothy Giannotti, who is now one of the deans at the American Islamic College in Chicago, was a professor at the University of Toronto and York University, and other schools, including Penn State and Oregon and elsewhere. A remarkable scholar of this time period. He translated Imam al-Ghazali, and he was my tutor for this particular class. And I owe him so much. The other translation, Bhai, that I really like, and that I think that I'm now leaning more towards, just in terms of the language and also the care of contemporary language, is The Conference of the Birds, translated by Sholeh Wolpe. Published by W.W. Norton and Company. And it's a fairly recent, fairly recent translation, and I like the Wolpe translation a lot. I'm just going to put the name in the chat. So it's Sholeh. Sholeh. Yeah, there we go. Wolpe.
The picture that you showed with that.
That's from the cover of that book. Yes, that's right.
I'm online. It's available for $26. It's not bad.
That's the one. That's the one.
If anybody wants to order it, okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So that really is it's a lovely book, and the introduction is really beautiful. And Wolpe takes a lot of care actually in building the scene around Attar, and particularly this interesting relationship with Maulana Rumi. There's that relationship is really fascinating, and like maybe these apocryphal stories of their connection I mean, I just find them so exciting that there's all these interesting ways in which histories collide. But there's no doubt that Rumi felt and thought and knew Attar as a master teacher. And the fact that they both wrote in the same style, I think there's something. Oh, my friend and colleague Kellen has just put in the chat. Bookshop.org also has it for $14. Yeah, it's wonderful. I know we have a few more minutes, Sajid Bhai, and I don't want to take people's time. I know we're approaching that special time of the evening. I'll hold it up again. Someone's asking to hold it up again. But I really do hope, Sajid Bhai and friends from the Princeton community and beyond, I really do hope that stories like this, and I think this is why these kinds of stories are so important, aren't they? They're such an important part of our tradition, because the allegory and the metaphor and the beauty of language, just allows us to express the fullness of the human experience. And I think we all go through these things, and we're all on these journeys. And I think it's a text, I think, that should be in every home. And it's a text that as parents who have children, or as grandparents who have grandchildren, these are texts that we can adapt, that the stories we can extract and retell in our own way, because that's the beauty of these texts, is that they're like a resource for us to come to understand the incredible complexity of life and the incredible gift that life is, with all of its joys and its travails.
Thank you so much. Can you just give us a quick preview of what's to come the next?
Of course I can. I'll be happy to. So inshallah, what we're gonna talk about next week is we're gonna get into the speech on love by the Hupu, which is just stunning, and we'll read the Wolpe translation, and it will set us up for the story that the Hupu tells. So this is an interesting part, Sajid Bhai, and thank you for that, for allowing me these few moments to say this. What's interesting is that the Conference of the Birds is stories within a larger story. There's that element of the of Layl Walail, of Layla Walail, that this idea of the 1001 Nights that Shahrazad tells these many stories. The Conference of the Birds works in the same way. The Hupu is going to be leading them on a journey. They're going through the journey, but at every moment of the journey, they're going to hit a snag or a challenge, and the Hupu is going to tell a story, and that story is going to help us get over that obstacle, and then we're going to go on to the next valley, and we're going to go into the next challenge, and then the Hupu is going to stop and tell us a few more stories to help our hearts and our minds and our souls adjust to the new reality of challenge, and then we're going to go on to something else. And so next week, we're going to really talk about the longest story in Mantiqat-Tayr, the story of Sheikh Sanan. And the story of Sheikh Sanan is like one of these epic stories, of love, and in some cases forbidden love. But it's an allegory for so much. And there's so many interesting ways to read it. And I think, inshallah, we'll try to read it in a way that really helps us on this path of love that we're on. And the fact that the openness that you and I, we all need to have, that the teaching is all around us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through circumstance, through what's happening, is teaching us all the time. And part of what this book wants to tell us is that Allah's wisdom is around us, if only we would develop our hearts and the lens of our hearts to see it.
Inshallah. Any other questions?
Sadi has a great question around the Hupu's male and femaleness. It's interesting because I'm only seeing it through translation, and a lot of the translations have her as a female. And Muhammad Isa Wali, Jazakallahu khairan for being here, Sheikh, and it's you who should be teaching this this particular session on this particular book. Muhammad Isa Wali says in the chat that not is a great start, but it is an abridgment. It is a translation of the French abridgment. Thank you for saying that. Yes. they're definitely, it is definitely an English translation of the French. And I would really love, Sidi Muhammad, please drop into the chat or just email us what you feel would be a really good translation. And Muhammad Isawali, for those of you who don't know, was the keeper of the Oriental manuscripts at the British Library for many, many years, took over that position from one of the great saintly men of our time, Martin Lings, and Muhammad Isa as a scholar, and also a beautiful and luminous human being. So Muhammad, Sidi Muhammad, it's so good that you were able to join us tonight. And please forgive me for any of my own mistakes. I approached this as a work of as an exercise in passion, which I'm sharing with all of you. Jazakallah khair, Sajid bhai.
Thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair to the Princeton community, and for all of you for being here tonight. I hope you have a wonderful first week of Ramadan with your families, and that all of you are incredibly safe and secure. And please remember us in your du'as, and you are all in our prayers, especially Imam Sohaib and all the members of your community. And may Allah continue to give all of you and Imam Mendez strength and give strength to your community always. And when we come out of this and open, I'm sure it's going to be a more stronger and resilient community, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you, everyone. And inshallah khair, same bat time, same bat channel. We'll see you back here. We'll see you back here next week.